Okay, so last time we started with the stories of Shahnameh. We started from Qumars, who was the first king, and I told you about the roots of Qumars' story, and Qumars as being the first human or even the prototype of a human instead of the first king. So that is what we see in our ancient texts. As you know, these texts are the roots of Shahnameh's stories. They're not Shahnameh's stories are not invented by Ferdowsi, as we talked about it enough. So I wanted to go over the stories one by one, talk about each of them. But obviously, there are so many of them. I cannot spend much time on every single king, even though I've spent almost half a session on just two first kings, Qumars and Hushang, because they were important. And first of all, and then the other point here is that I wanted you to learn that each of these stories have something behind them. There are some other aspects of each story that you can discover. And in fact, this is the main goal of covering these stories by me. So I try to not tell you the entire story. I will skip them. I will skim through them very fast, but I try to emphasize a few aspects of each story, which is remarkable. I try to give you a bit of background. So obviously this is not the mythology class. So in the other class that I have, Shahnameh mythology, I talk about them in depth. And there are very beautiful stories outside Shahnameh about each one of these characters. I do not have time to talk about all of them. I want to touch a few of them so you just get a flavor of it. If you are interested, go just read those other references. However, in each story, if I see that something is interesting to emphasize on or basically delve into some other aspects of Shahnameh that you want to know. For example, a few of the verses are very beautiful. I emphasize, of course, all the verses are beautiful, but some of them are interesting from certain aspects. I want to touch on those. And I did not get a copy of those verses, but I have the book with me today. So I'm going to just go find those verses and read them for you and translate on the fly. Anyway, let's start with the story of the third king, Tahmuraspa. Tahmuraspa, the binder of demons. After Hushang, we have Tahmuraspa. Tahmuraspa is his son, according to Shahnameh. One thing to remember is that all of these kings who are son of the previous kings are kind of invented over the years, over the time. So if you look at Avesta as the old ancient text and the main reference of all of these stories, you do not see such connection as father and sons. So what you see here is that it said that Hushang did this and Tahmuraspa did that. But the fact that Tahmuraspa comes right after Hushang means that perhaps there's a chronological order in place. And obviously this was perhaps a king after that. It does not even say that Tahmuraspa was right after Hushang. Who knows? There might have been some people in the middle. But remember, these are myths. This does not necessarily mean that these were real kings who came one after another. But in our myths and stories, they are depicted as such. So when I say that Tahmuraspa is Hushang's son, that doesn't mean as such. And in fact, when we reach out to Jamshid, according to Shahnameh, Jamshid is the son of Tahmuraspa. However, in other texts, we see that Tahmuraspa is the brother of Jamshid is the brother of Tahmuraspa. It's completely different. And in many, many other stories, I'm going to talk about some of them today as well. You see that these family relationships are very loosely defined. So they are not very strict. So anyway, according to Shahnameh, Tahmuraspa is the son of Hushang, and his title is the binder of demons, Div Band. So in this story, we learn why he's defined as such. But the story of Tahmuraspa, as the previous two kings and the one after, talks about the development of civilization and how Tahmurasp helps in that development. Remember that in these stories and in general in the history overall, so many thousands of millions of people are forgotten, and just the kings or a few noble people are remembered. So in this story, we read that Tahmurasp does everything. He shows people how to shear the sheep and goat, and how to turn their wool into fibers and fashion clothes. And he showed people how to weave carpets, how to tame animals. But where did that all come from? So obviously that means that the civilization reached a point that all of these things are discovered and developed. But now Tahmurasp takes the credit for all of them, according to this story. But after this, then it talks about a second character. This is the first character other than kings that we read about in Shahnameh. This person's name is Shahrasp, and he is a Mubad. He's a religious person, and he's a person who is fasting during the day and he's praying during the night, and he's a very pure person, and he helps Tahmurasp to reach the same point, so same level. And after the teaching, learning the teachings of Shahrasp, Tahmurasp becomes purified and becomes basically without any evil spirit. And as a result of that, he is given a divine far or farra. This is a very key concept in Shahnameh that you need to understand. Far or farra is very important. Let me just briefly talk about it. So the original word in Avesta is chovarna. Chovarna is a glory or splendor, is a divine mystical force or power projected upon and aiding the appointed. So it's a power, is a force that comes from God, and whoever that has that can do things that others cannot. We have different types of chovarna. That, by the way, this word in Middle Persian becomes khora, and then far or farra in Persian. So, and there are different types of it. We have farra izadi, farra kiani, farra mubadi, farra irani. So these are the Persian words. The Iranian farra, the mubad farra, the king farra. And all of these mean that people who have these are empowered. They are special. Even the Iranians is called as such, Iranian farra. But the main one, which is called Izadi farra or the Kiani farra, is given to kings and make them do things that are special. So for example, in here, so it's kind of backward. At first, Tahmurasp does all of things and then has the farra. But basically, throughout the stories, if a king can do something special, is because of his farra. So for example, way ahead in one of the stories of, we have Kekhosro. Kekhosro is a very special king in Shahnameh. In one of the stories, a story of Bijan and Manijeh, so nobody knows where Bijan is. Bijan is at the end of the well, and is basically captured by Afrasiab. Nobody knows where he is. But Kekhosro has a kind of like a magic mirror that he looks into and finds where Bijan is. We see other things that other kings do, like Kekawus even does some of these and others. So these are the specialties that all come from Farah. But the beautiful thing, the most special thing about Farah is that no king should take it for granted. It may be taken away. So the special requirement of a Farah is that you need to be a good person. You need to be a just king. If you do anything else, if you do something that is not approved by God, your Farah is taken away from you. And this is what happens to multiple kings, including Jamshid and Nozar. They lose their Farah. And as a result of that, they become vulnerable. So I'll tell you the story of Jamshid. But let's get back to the story of Tahmuras. So Tahmuras gets these Khovarana or Farah, with this glory. And then as a result of that, he can mount Ahriman as a horse. And he ride him all around the globe. So this is the power that he has as a result of this. And then the demons who see this get frightened. They're worried about Tahmuras and they decide to attack him and defeat him. So they create an army. However, Tahmuras is so empowered and powerful that go and capture them. He kills 2/3 of the demons, and then the rest are captured and they are tied. They're basically chained by Tahmuras, and that's why Tahmuras is called Div Band, the binder of demons. That's where his title comes from. And then, so let me just briefly tell you that all of these short stories have some meanings and some roots behind them. I do not have time to go talk about much of them. But for example, in here, these 2/3 and 1/3, we see them. We see them in our other text. Some of them may not even be for Tahmuras. In this case, they say that Jamshid does that. Jamshid kills 2/3 of the demons of Mazandaran. We have that in ancient text. But then, in this case, is Tahmuras. Or mounting Ahriman. We have this story. And in fact, we have one of the books called, let me just find the name of that story. So, that's interesting. I wrote that somewhere. Anyway, so I do not find this here, but Darab Hormozyar. The book of Darab Hormozyar has the rest of this story. What happens after he rides Ahriman? And it's a sweet story, so I tell you very briefly that Ahriman is so tired of this, and he want to do something about it. So he deceives Tahmuras' wife and wanted her to help him get rid of Tahmuras, and ask her, so what is it that Tahmuras is afraid of? And the wife, who is deceived and maybe tempted by something, maybe by riches or jewelry, she says that, okay, let me go figure it out. And she talks to Tahmuras, and Tahmuras said that actually, when Ahriman takes me down the hills, sometimes I get afraid. And the wife tells that to Ahriman. Ahriman knows that the next time that they are going down the hill, at some point he stops and then throw Tahmuras down from his horse, or from himself, who's like a horse at this point, and then Tahmuras dies, gets killed. And then who takes the revenge is Jamshid. Jamshid comes back and do some kind of revenge, and then he buries Tahmuras, who is his brother. Again, this is not Shahnameh. This is the Darab Hormozyar's book. It's a different book that has this story. But according to Shahnameh, Tahmuras ride Ahriman with no problem, and then binds the demons, and the demons beg him for forgiveness. They ask him not to kill him, and in return, they said, okay, we should teach you something very special. And that special thing is writing. They teach him how to write in 30 different languages: Persian, Arabic, Roman, Chinese, Pahlavi, and some others. These are named actually in Shahnameh. It's very interesting. So, and after learning this, obviously he lives a good life, and then he dies. But what does that mean? So let's talk about that a bit. So what's the meaning of this story and these demons, and teaching him how to write? So obviously there are all speculations. Some of these we can interpret. So, but one of the interesting interpretations comes from Dr. Kazazi, who is one of the Shahnameh scholars. He says that actually demons are probably the native people of Iran. I mentioned that to you once, that when Aryans migrated to Iran, obviously they were faced with the native people of Iran who lived there for perhaps thousands of years. And they had different appearances. They were more built and taller and stronger, darker skins, and they called them demons. Or maybe they were turned into demons over the ages. Who knows? However, so the native people of Iran were civilized. So they knew things. They were farmers. They had skills that Aryans didn't. So they learned a lot from them. So in the story of Jamshid, which is the next story, we hear that Jamshid forces demons to build houses, palaces, bathhouses. So demons were architects. So this is something that clearly Aryans didn't have. Aryans did not have. They were maybe migrating from a place to place mostly, so they were not settlers. But when you see native Iranians, they learn from them how to build houses. So that's one thing that they could have learned from them. The other thing is this writing. So remember that these civilizations were all connected. We know that Mesopotamia was the cradle of civilizations. There were a lot of advanced things happened there, and one of them could be writing. So the ancient writings come from that area, that region, and Iranians could have learned from them, or maybe even vice versa. Who knows? So we have now found some very ancient civilizations in, for example, the area of Jiroft near Kerman, and they were pretty advanced and ancient. However, there are things that we can discover from some civilizations, and some are disappeared over the years, so they've lost. So we don't know who was first. But obviously, all of these were had rich culture and civilizations, and Aryans learned from them. However, you may ask that question that, okay, Aryans were not apparently as advanced. How come they conquered, they prevailed? So it seems that there's one simple reason, and that is that they could ride horses. So they tamed horses, or they had learned how to ride them. And this is good for fighting. So they had the upper hand when they were fighting the locals, the natives. And in fact, Dr. Kazazi imagines things, so who knows whether they are true or not, but he has interesting points behind this. He says that natives were trying to escape from Aryans, and as a result of that, they were going to hills and to the places that Aryans could not reach with horses. And that's where the roots of the story of demons of Mazandaran come from. Mazandaran is close to that Alborz mountain, and that area, they believe that the demons lived there. And so the natives eventually perhaps migrated to that area to be far away from the attackers, from Aryans. So that could be, who knows? But I just want you to train your brain to know that each of these stories that you hear about, the story of Divan of Mazandaran, the demons of Mazandaran, so maybe this has some root like this, or not. Who knows? Just entertain your mind and imagine things like that and just enjoy it. And over the years, hopefully we find some evidence that's prove some of these or disprove them. Some of them have been, but that's the characteristic of myths, that you cannot say for sure what has or hasn't been. Anyway, let's move on to Jamshid, the next king. Jamshid, according to Shahnameh, is the son of Tahmuraspa, and again, he progressed the civilization. They taught people how to create war weapons, how to weave and sew clothes, and then how he discovered fragrances and he discovered medicine. The medicine part is very interesting because we also see that in other texts that Jamshid discovered medicine. However, in some other texts like Vandidad, medicine is attributed to Feridun. Feridun is the person who invented medicine. Feridun is obviously a later king. So that's why when you read these stories, some of the things that that has happened exist. The story is there, and then the story is passed on from one person to another. You will see another example of that today. That you said, oh, this happened. Like, for example, the example of the demons, the 2/3 of the demons being killed. In one text, it says it was Tahmuraspa. The other one, it says it was Jamshid. So we have these things that happened, and some of them, all of them are a sign of something that was perhaps rooted in reality at some point, but were attributed to different people at different times. Anyway, so the other interesting thing that Jamshid did is that he divided people into different groups and assigned them tasks. So one group was the religious people. He wanted them to worship and do prayers to God. And he settled them in mountains. This is interesting key, that they believed that people, the holy people, or the religious people, the people who were dedicated their lives to God, lived in mountains. And you see that later on in the story of Feridun, when Feridun's mom, Faranak, wanted to take her son and rescue him from Zahak, she takes him to mountains and finds a religious person to raise him. Why mountains? Because of this. And then we later on even see, I think it was Kavus or another king. So they actually built some temples. They built them in the mountains. All right. So then religious people were one group. The other one were soldiers, the army people, and then the farmers. The farmer one is, so Ferdowsi says something very beautiful about them. Let me just find that verse for you. He says, بکارند و ورزند و خود بدروند، به گاه خورش سرزنش نشنوند، ز فرمان تنازاده و خورده نوش، از آوای پیغار آسوده گوش. تنازاد آباد گیتی بدوی، برآسوده از داور و گفتگوی. This is very interesting. I do not translate word by word, but the whole idea here is that these kind of people are independent. They're free-spirited. Why? Because these are the people who can survive without the need of anyone else, because they're making food, right? So they do not accept complaints or order from anybody. They live their life and they are free because they make food. They're farmers. Anyway, after that, so the fourth type group of people are craftsmen and tradespeople. People who do trading, do crafting, like blacksmith and other folks. And these are the fourth group. And these groupings is interesting. Over the ages, these grouping of people has happened. So we know that in the history. However, at some even the type of groupings have changed over the years. So we know that in the history that at Sasanian era, people were divided into multiple groups. There were 4 groups similar to this. We had that in the Sasanian era. However, before that, there were usually people were in 3 groups. There were the religious ones, there were the army people, and the rest. So the farmers and the craftsmen, they were all bound together. But during the Sasanian era, they were divided. And that's why even in the story, we see that people are divided in 4. They believe that these stories are not that old, or they've changed over the years so that they fit into this new model than the old model. So anyway, let's move on from that. And then one of the important things that Jamshid does is Nowruz, the Persian New Year. So the story is says that Jamshid sat on a throne and then asked the demons to take him to the sky. They do that, and everybody watches and amazed. And then when he returns to the earth, everybody gathers around him and they celebrate that day. That day was the Ormazd of Farvardin, the first day of the new calendar year that we have, which is, by the way, is not the oldest one. So this is also something interesting to know that during the, for example, Achaemenid era, Nowruz was not the beginning of the calendar year, and it was not the main celebration or festival. The main festival was Mehragan. And then later on, it was moved to be at Nowruz. Anyway, so they celebrate this day and they call it New Day, Nowruz. So let me just read these few verses for you. It says چو خورشید تابان میان هوا نشسته بر او شاه فرمان روا جهان انجمن شد بر آن تخت اوی شگفتی فرو مانده از بخت اوی به جمشید بر گوهر افشاندند مر آن روز را روز نو خواندند سر سال نو هرمز فرودین برآسوده از رنج تن دل ز کین بزرگان به شادی بیاراستند می و جام و رامشگران خواستند چون این جشن فرخ از آن روزگار به ما ماند از آن خسروان یادگار. Let me just translate the last verse, which says that such an auspicious celebration is a legacy of those great kings. It says Khosrovan. It just is a plural form of Khosrow. It just doesn't say Jamshid. But maybe in a sense, maybe Ferdowsi is giving hints that actually it might not be Jamshid, but this is a legacy to us from those noble people, great people from the past. Anyway, so all of these are the good things that Jamshid does. And as a result of this, Jamshid becomes selfish. And look at the words, say that, oh, everything's great because of me. I did all of these good things. He becomes selfish and claims to be the God. He forgets the God. He thinks that everything is because of him. Even though all of these things that he might have done was due to the farah. Remember that, the Kiani farah that he had from God. But he forgets that. He thinks that he is the God. And everybody's annoyed. Everybody's upset. But nobody dares to say anything. However, as a result of this, he loses the farah. And then, obviously, all the bad things can happen to him afterwards. And in this part of the Shahnameh, the story of Jamshid switches to the story of Zahak. Now, the new character is introduced. This is one of the parts of Shahnameh that you see that is kind of like a modern story. So I don't know if you're into Dan Brown's books, so Da Vinci Code and stuff like that. So in this book, you see that in one chapter, he's talking about one character, and then he leaves him there, moves to another character, talks about that, and eventually these two characters merge to each other. This is one of the techniques of the novel authors. And this is what we see that Ferdowsi does. He does not explain why he's left the story there. So Jamshid did this, and all the bad things could happen to him. And he stops there. He moves to another story, the story of Zahak. And then these two eventually merge. However, before moving to the story of Zahak, let me just give you a bit background on Jamshid as a good person. In the Zoroastrian text, Jamshid is praised actually in many places, even though he's also blamed and he's also scolded, at least, especially in one place, which is the most important to all of us, and that is Gata. In Gata, Jamshid is named, and is not named for a good thing that he did, for the bad thing that he did. He said that he did a sin. What sin? According to Gata, it seems that the sin that he did was to start eating animals, the meat of animals. This is the sin that he did. But in other texts, we have different things that Jamshid did, which was a sin. One of them is in some other text, it says that Jamshid did a lie, lied to people. What lie? We can interpret this as his lie, the lie that I'm the God, right? So anyway, so this is interesting that in Gata, besides people who were at the time of Gushtas, at the time of Zarathustra himself, Gushtas, Jamas, and people who lived in his time, he just named one other person, and that is Jamshid, Ima. Jamshid, the name of Jamshid comes from two parts, Ima or Yama, and Shid. Shid means brilliant, or I don't remember the word. Derakshan. So something that's used, lights is emanated from him, something like that, like the sun, right? So, but in other texts, including Vandidad, especially Vandidad, Jamshid is named and is praised for all the good things that he did. So again, I don't want to go through all the details of these stories. These stories are beautiful. Just I recommend that you read them. But some of them I really want to tell you. But for example, this one is the story of in Vandidad. It talks about the dialogue between God, Ahura Mazda, and Zarathustra. Zarathustra asked Ahura Mazda, before me, who was there any other person who you asked to spread your word? And Ahura Mazda said, actually, yes, it was Jamshid who was first. I asked him to spread the word, spread my religion. But Jamshid said, no, I'm not in that business. I cannot do that. And I asked him, then, okay, if you cannot do this, then make my world a better place. And he said, okay, I can do that. So that's why Jamshid did all the good things. And Jamshid was even given some tools for that. He was given, I think it was a cane, and he was given a ring for that. So he was, these are mentioned in Vandidad. And then during his time, he did all these good things, and there was no disease. There was no problem. Nobody died. Everybody was happy. People looked only 15-year-olds, which is awesome. So nobody aged. So due to all of good things that happen, obviously what happens as a result, if nobody dies, what happens? So overpopulation. So there are a lot of people, and then the earth is not enough for everybody. So then Ahura Mazda asked Jamshid to extend his earth, and Jamshid does that. Jamshid, I think he tapped his, I think his cane to the ground, and with his ring, he turned the earth, and the earth is extended by 1/3. So now there's more space for people, and people again live there happily, and they multiply, and again the earth is filled. And Jamshid does that again after 300 years, and he does that again. He does that 3 times, and then the earth is expanded, and everybody's fine then. Then there is a moment where Ahura Mazda has a meeting apparently with all the Izads. And then he invites Jamshid to that as well. And he tells everybody that, okay, there will be a cold winter. And nobody can survive that unless you protect yourself. And he asks Jamshid to build a fortress, a place that people can get into and they can survive this cold winter. It's called Var. Var, some people say it is wall, means wall. Some people say that it means just means the whole or something. So anyway, so he creates that. He creates that place for people, and then he selects them. So he does not he does not invite everyone there because people cannot fit there, but he selects people, and he even mentions that he selects the healthy people, not people who are crazy, who people are sick. He selects the good people, this healthy people, and also from the animals. He gets a pair of each animal and just put them there. Remember, so I don't know if you know the Noah's uh, ship story. So we have that in our myth as well. So many of these stories are repeated over and over in different ships and forms in different cultures. Anyway, he put them all in that vat, in that place, and they survive that cold weather. So this is what the story that we see around Jamshid, Jamshid's life and what he did in Vandidad. So in Vandidad, he's an excellent person. He's a good person. He is not talked about what he did wrong, but we have that in other sources, including Shahnameh. Okay, so the story of Zahak. Zahak is, first of all, a person who is comes from basically Saudi Arabia or that region of the world, and his father is a good person, Mardas, but Zahak, with the help of Iblis, kills his father. Who's Iblis? Iblis is a very interesting character. We can't say Iblis is Ahriman, but in the Persian mythology, we say that Ahriman and Ahura-Mazda, especially in that later version of the story, Ahriman and Ahura-Mazda are rivals. But in the Islamic version of the story that comes from that region, the Arabic region, Iblis is one of the angels that does not worship to man, and as a result of that, he is God basically disapproves him and says that, okay, you can do whatever you want, but I don't like you anymore. And then the devil, Iblis, said that, okay, then I'm going to deceive human beings. I'm going to make them do bad things. And that's according to that religion and other Abrahamic religions. This is Iblis or Shaitan or the devil is responsible for all the bad things that humans do. So that's why in this part of the story, it talks about Iblis, not Ahriman. But anyway, Iblis forces or maybe deceives Zahak, and with his help, Mardas is killed. Let me just tell you one thing about another aspects of Shahnameh and Ferdowsi's brilliant work right here. Ferdowsi has a very clean language. This is something that you need to know about. So comparing that to other poets, Persian poets, who sometimes have even vulgar words or talk about, I don't know, maybe sexual concepts. Some of them are very sexual, believe it or not. Even Rumi has one of those stories that when you read them, you say, oh my God, he has them. He has a very sexual story that at the end of that, he comes up with some moral from that story. However, Ferdowsi does not do any of that. So to give you one example of this, in this moment, I think I mentioned that before, that every once in a while, Ferdowsi stops the story and talks from adds his own voice to the story. And this is one of those examples. In the place where Zahak kills his own father. This is insane. This is unheard of. Somebody kills his own father. So in this part of the story, he says these two words. He says that I've heard this from a wise man. This is what Ferdowsi says. که فرزند بد گر شود نره شیر به خون پدر هم نباشد دلیر. He says that even if you are a lion, if you're a male lion, you do not want to kill your own father. Not even a lion. He does not do that. But he said, مگر در نهانش سخن دیگر است. پژوهنده را راز با مادر است. He says, unless there is another, unless there is something hidden, and that mystery is with the mother. You know what that means, right? The mystery is with the mother. Maybe that guy is not his father. Mother knows that. The mother might have been with another man. And this might be another man's son, not his own son. Otherwise, son cannot kill his own father. But see how Ferdowsi says it. He said the mystery is with the mother. That's it. He doesn't say anything else. He could have said it in a million different ways, but he didn't. He did not do it explicitly. Very, very delicately, very beautifully, he says it as such. پژوهنده را راز با مادر است. Anyway, let's move on. After this, Iblis, the devil, continues his work. So he turns himself into a chef and then encourages Zahak to eat whatever he cooks for him, which is obviously from the meat of animal. And he makes Zahak cruel as a result of this. And then, but Zahak enjoys it a lot. And as a result, Zahak wanted to give a prize to the chef, who is actually a devil. And the devil says, okay, I just want to kiss your shoulders. And he does. Zahak grants that wish, and then kissing his shoulders, two snakes, two sprouts, two dragons, whatever you want to call it, sprout from his shoulders. And then the devil disappears. And Zahak is frightened. He wants to just cut the head of those snakes, but that does not help. They sprout again. And nobody knows what to do until the devil again disguises himself and comes back as a physician. He says that you cannot do anything about this. You just need to live with them, learn to live with them, and find a way to not get harmed by them. And the solution to that is to feed them with the brain of the youth. And that's where Zahak becomes more and more cruel. He kills two young people every day and just feed their brains to the serpents, to the snakes. So let me read you one sentence here, one verse, which is very interesting, and it has some background. It says, actually, there are two verses. It said, سر نره دیوان از این جستجوی چه جست و چه دیدن در این گفتگوی مگر تا یکی چاره سازد نهان که پردخته ماند ز مردم جهان. It says that the head of all the demons is referring to the devil. The devil had an intention about doing all of this, and that was to get rid of all the humans. He wanted to, پردخته ماند ز مردم جهان. So the earth be clear of all the people. So this might sound like an ordinary sentence to you. However, it has a background, and let me tell you the background. I mentioned that Zahak, I think I mentioned that before. Zahak in Avesta is not a human. Zahak is called Ajidahak. Ajidahak. Aji means Ejdaha, means dragon. And Dahak is just name. And some people try to have some meaning for the word Dahak. Some people say that, okay, it's a person who has done 10 different sins. However, that's not proven. So Ajidahak is that creature who is just a dragon with 3 heads and 3 mouths and 6 eyes. This is how it's depicted. And in Aban Yasht, in one of the important Yasht of Yasht that tells the story of some of these characters, And this is one of the Yas, which is, I think, is pre-Zoroastrian era. So this is an ancient Yasht that in each part of that, one person sacrifices 100 horses and 1,000 cows and 10,000 ships to Ardovisur Anahit, not even to God, to Ardovisur Anahit, which is I think the angel of water. But Ardovisur Anahit or Anahita or Nahit was one of the powerful gods of pre-Zoroastrian era. So they sacrifice to him, and everybody has an ask. And the ask that Zahak has is to kill all the people, to remove all the people from the entire earth. That's what we see in Avesta. And that is reflected as such in here. It's not obvious. Obviously, Zahak is a human here. So at least the devil seems to be its counterpart. That's why this in here in Shahnameh, we see that this is the wish of the devil, not Zahak himself. Zahak is just a fool who's deceived by him. Okay. And by the way, after that, in Avesta, in Aban Yasht, it says that but Ardovisur Anahit did not grant that wish. So we have this verse after each one of these sacrifices and wishes, that whether Ardovisur Anahit granted or not. In this case, in the case of Zahak, he says that, he did not grant that wish. Obviously, because we are alive, we are here. Okay. All right. So now this is the part that the story of Zahak and Jamshid merge. The two meet. Zahak comes to Iran and sat on a throne. However, how he does it is very interesting. He does not make an army and do an attack to begin with. He's invited by Iranians. The noble people of Iran, the powerful people of Iran, who are tired of all the chaos which is resulted from the crazy claim that Jamshid made, go to him, go to Zahak. They hear that there is somebody who is very powerful and he is in that region of the world, and they go to him and ask him to come and just sit on the throne and just become the king of Iran. And that's how Zahak does it. So when Jamshid loses that Farah, nobody loves him anymore. And as a result, that everybody rebels. This is another interesting point that we see that multiple times in Shahnameh. It actually, this is a recurring theme. This happens in Nozar's story as well, where people do not like him, then there's chaos. So anyway, Zahak comes to Iran and Jamshid escapes, and he is hidden for 100 years until Zahak finds him and kills him. He cuts him in half. And this is the end of the story of Jamshid. But let me tell you another interesting point. What you read in Shahnameh, even though Shahnameh is a very big book and a lot of stories in it, but it's only a portion of all the myths and stories that we have from past. Some of the stories you can find in other sources that Ferdowsi does not even touch. But you need to remember that Ferdowsi was just turning a book into poetry. So whatever was in his reference, it was here. For some reason, whoever wrote that book maybe either did not have access to that reference or they decided to skip that part. And one of the reasons for this is that they wanted to create this chain of stories, chain of people, fathers and sons, and all of these heroes that appear in these stories. And as a result, they wanted to create a very cohesive and connected book that makes sense to people. But there are other stories. One of them is in here. About 50 years after Ferdowsi, there's another person called Asadi Tusi. He has a book named Shahnameh. We have many of these names, by the way. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh is only one of them. We have Gershasname, we have Bahmanname, Banu Goshasname, Faramarzname. There are so many of these names. These are the books that tell the story of other characters which are not um, talked about deeply in Shahnameh. For example, Faramarzname talks about the story of Faramarz, who is Rostam's son. We have Bahmanname, the story of Bahman, who is Isfandiar's son. We have Banu Goshasname of Rostam, who has a very interesting story. So Banu Goshasp is obviously the daughter of Rostam. She's powerful, she's strong, and nobody even dares to go and ask her to marry him. So until Giv, another Iranian Pahlavan, Iranian hero, wants to marry her, she said, okay, I'll do that, but we first need to do some wrestling. If you can defeat me, then I'll be your wife. So anyway, they wrestle, and that story. So anyway, so what I'm telling you is that there are other stories that are not in Shahnameh. One of the stories in Gershasname is the story of Gershasp. So I want to talk a bit about Gershasp. Gershasp is a very important character in our mythological history. Gershasp is the most powerful
looks like something has gone wrong at Afshin's side. I think he will join again, so just hang on. As we all know, technology is great as long as it works. So now let's just give a few minutes for him to join again. I think he is calling. Okay, that was Afshin. He has some computer difficulties, but then again, he's a computer genius, so I'm sure he'll fix it. Sure. And he should be back with us in a couple of minutes. So in the meantime, we are here. If somebody has a few words to say or share their thoughts up to now, feel free to do so, so we can use this time productively.
One of the things that I read, I think it's a Bauman Surti's book, is that when Zahak asked for those 2 brains every day, the cook would quietly send one person out and only substitute something. And eventually they said, these are the people who escaped and are referred to as the Kurds or something. Has anyone read that? The Kurd, yeah. Kurds, is that, am I on the right track? Have you read that?
Yes, I have heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this will be all mythologies. This
Mythology.
nobody knows really what
Nobody.
happened.
Exactly.
But these are interesting stories. I think it's more of a fascinating. It could be somebody's imagination. Who knows?
Yeah.
Right. But this is a very interesting imagination. If it is imagination.
Okay.
Eating the brain is usually brainwashing the youth.
Yeah.
It's not actually eating the brain. We say in Gujarati, "Mathuve jo khai gyo."
Yeah.
So that's eating the brain, brainwashing the youth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very significant. Yeah. That could be the connection.
Yeah, that's very interesting way of putting it. Yeah, that could very well be. Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, so Afshin is back. So thank you, Afshin, for getting back so quickly.
Sorry, it's not that quick. Actually, I'm waiting for my machine to boot out. That's my phone. So, do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just continue on this device for a few minutes. Yeah, I was telling you the story of Yarshasp, whose name is Krasaspa in Avesta. And he's a very strong hero of Iran, and he has so many stories in which he defeats people left and right and just fights the demons and dragons and everyone in between. So he's a great hero, and he's basically the Rostam of, so you can compare him to Rostam, who's the great hero. However, Yarshasp is completely missing from Shahnameh, and this is a very so it's a big mystery. So why is that so? So there are different theories about it. One of them is that Ferdowsi did not want him to be the rival of his Rostam. But as I mentioned, it was not Ferdowsi's idea. Ferdowsi is just narrating another book, maybe the story of the idea of those people. However, so one theory is that we have different types of Khodainameh. Remember that all of these books these stories come from Khodainames. And Khodainameh has had different versions. And one version that perhaps is the one that is mainly, perhaps the reference of Shahnameh of Al-Mansur, is the one that is called the Heroes Khodainameh. So the Khodainameh, which is kind of a version that is sympathetic to heroes more than the kings. That's why in some part of Shahnameh, you see that whenever there is an argument, there's a disagreement between the king and the hero, usually the hero is on the right side. So we see the story of argument between Rostam and Keykavus, for example, in which Keykavus is unreasonable, but Rostam is right. Or we see the story of Gushtas. This is another interesting part of the thing about Shahnameh. In Gushtas, in Avesta, he's a good person. He's a very good person, right? So the person who accepts Zartush's religion and helps to spread that. Even though he has that side in Shahnameh as well, we see that story in Shahnameh. However, Gushtas is very selfish, and he, even before he becomes king, he fights against his own father, he argues with him, he leaves the land and goes to Roman Empire just because his father does not agree to give him his throne, which of course is unreasonable. His father is alive and he's well. Why should he transfer power to him? And even after he becomes a king as a result of all of these fascinating stories during the time of Lohas, Gushtas does not want to do the same thing to his son, even though he promises him. This is different than what he did to his father. His father did not say that I'll give you the throne. He said, okay, I'll do that, but it's not time. However, he multiple times tells his son, Esfandiar that you need, if you do this one, this thing with that task, I would give you the throne. But he doesn't. He refuses to do that. And that's why at the end, he sends Esfandiar to his own death. To fight Rostam. Obviously, the ask that he has from Rostam, which is to tie his hand, is very obvious. They fight and Rostam. All of these, for all of these, Gushtas is the blood. So this is why I'm saying that this version of Khodaiinameh that you deal with, read about, I think is more closer to the heroes. So oh, it was talking about Yarshas process. Okay, it was why Yarshas was not in Shahnameh. Again, this might be because of that particular version of Khodaiinameh, in which there was the story of Rostam and his family, but not necessarily Krasaspa or Yarshas. That could be the reason. However, we know that according to the other myths, Rostam is a descendant of Yarshas. In Shahnameh, we read that story that starts from all the ancestors of Yarshas. It tells all of that story, and that's why I'm talking about that right now here, because in the story of Zahak and Jamshid, you read that Jamshid
All right, sorry, I'm back. So I forgot to plug in my laptop and I lost the power. Anyway, in this part of the story of Jamshid and Zahak, when he says that Jamshid escaped and was hidden for 100 years, in Shahnameh we read the story of that 100 years. Where was Jamshid during those 100 years? The story is in a way that it says that Jamshid escaped from town to town, and he could not live anywhere for long because Zahak had ordered his picture to be drawn and be spread out. So everybody who can't find him, so he said, oh, I give you gold coins and I give you, make you one of the nobles. So he could not live anywhere for long. So he came from town to town, went from town to town until he reaches Sistan. And then he meets the daughter of Kurang, who's the king or ruler of Sistan. And then they two fall in love and they marry in hiding, in secret. Nobody knows that. This story is very similar to the story of Bijan and Manije, where Manije secretly take Bijan to her own palace without anybody knowing. And this is the same story. Kurang's daughter takes Jamshid to her own palace, lives with him for a while, and becomes pregnant. And then his father learns about this. He gets upset in the beginning, but when he realizes that he's Jamshid and and his daughter loves him, he agrees to him living there for a while. But then he is this boy who is born from these two. It's called Tur. He grows up and becomes identical to Jamshid in terms of appearance. So this is the way that people could know that something's going on. Who's this guy and where did he come from? So as a result of this, Kurang tells Jamshid, okay, it's for you, it's time to leave. So you cannot stay here anymore. And then Jamshid accepts, and then he escapes to, I think, India first and then China. And at the end, Zahak captures him in the Sea of China, apparently. But we have different versions of this story. In one version, he goes to India and he rules there for a while until a Maharaja fights against him, captures him, and then gives him to Zahak. This is another version of that story. But anyway, in Gyar Shahnameh, the story continues with the story of Tur, who's Jamshid's son, and then he has another son. He has his own son, and then another generation. Oh, we have all these names. We have Sham and Asvat and all of the Turog, and until we reach Gyar-Shasp. Gyar-Shasp is a descendant of Jamshid, according to that myth, according to that story that is in Gyar Shahnameh. And then that story continues with the story of Nariman, who is the nephew of Gyar-Shasp. His father has passed away, so Gyar-Shasp raises Nariman. And then we have Sam. Sam is the son of Nariman. And then we have that story. The rest of that story is not in Gyar Shahnameh. We do not have that there, but we know that from Shahnameh that Sam is the son of Nariman, father of Zal, and grandfather of Rostam. So Rostam is the descendant of Gyar-Shasp and is a descendant of Jamshid in one side. And the other, on the other side, I don't know if you follow that story, but believe it or not, he's a descendant of Zahak. So we reached that story. But anyway, what I'm saying is that all of these people are again connected to each other through from various sources. If you want to just put that in the bigger picture, you will see that. And obviously some of them are even in contrast with each other. So some of them do not even make sense. And one of them is the one that actually is in the story of Feridun, and there's another aspect of it that I want to tell you. But I think I want to stop here maybe at the end of the story of Jamshid. So again, I failed at making good progress today. So I did just 2 more kings. So in this speed, we are not going anywhere. So you tell me if you want this much depth, or obviously we do not have more than 2 more sessions, but I'll try to tell you as much as I can during these 2 sessions. And then the rest of them, I'm sure that you will follow yourself. All right. Thank you so much. I listen to you guys.